We are joined by Bryan Intihar of Insomniac Games, hot off the presses, I guess, from the release of Spider-Man 2. Very excited to have you there. I'm joined by Lucy James, of course.
Hi.
And we are going to be talking about Spider-Man 2 in this spoiler cast.
That's what we're talking about today?
That's what we're doing.
Okay,
Do you know? Have you heard of that game?
Yes,
Spider-Man
well, I haven't
2?
played any other game this year, so that's probably good that we're talking about Spider-Man 2.
Yeah. We're going to dive deep into the game and the story. So if you haven't played it, first of all, you should probably go play that and then come back to check this out. But yeah, let's get straight into it. So Bryan, obviously successful first game and then a successful kind of spin-off game based on that.
Yep.
You're coming up to Spider-Man 2. What is it as a team that you go into it thinking that your objective is, and what do you want to achieve with a follow-up game?
Great question. One is, I think first one was really about, hey, can we do it, right? We never worked on a licensed IP before. Obviously, working on something as popular as Spider-Man, like probably the most popular Marvel character. You know, it's like, hey, can we prove we can do it? And now, thank you for the compliment that the first one was successful. It's like, okay, can we do it again? And expectations are real, right? It's real, and I think whereas before people were like, hey, can they just do it? Now it's like they have these expectations of like, oh, it's going to be everything and more, and that can be intimidating. It can be like very stressful, very stressful. I think what we kind of said was, okay, let's think about things in three buckets. One is don't screw it up. Like, here are the things that like don't make it worse. Like, people love swinging around the city. Don't make that worse. Like, just find the things that will make it better. Yeah. So that's an example. And then there's like, okay, hey, we've played the game ourselves. We've seen what fans are saying. We've read the reviews. What are areas like boss fights or injecting more narrative and exploration in the side content? That's stuff that we can actually improve upon. Okay, let's that stuff. And then the third thing was, hey, we knew very early on this was going to be a PS5 only game. Like, we were going to make it exclusive for the PS5. What can we do, whether it's the way we're leveraging the console, what we want to do from set pieces, hero switching, all different features, like how can we take advantage of the PlayStation 5? And that's kind of how the journey started. So like the pillars of the game kind of represent that journey. It's like, we wanted to, tell a story of two Spider-Men, right? That was like something, and we wanted to say, okay, how can we, make this more of a reactive city? So having more exploration, discovery, more narrative, having more cause and effect. So like seeing the aftermath of the Sandman fight, that early on in the mission where they're in the boat, the overturned boat where Kraven gets Lee and Scorpion. Mm-hmm. For several missions later, you can see the boat still in the water, right? And I think, because like, in Spider-Man 1, we had that one mission where like, the helicopter, or that's what, in that's a cool sequence, right? But like in video game world, if you just turn your head after the mission's over, it's gone. Yeah. And we want to have more of that cause and effect. And then it was like, hey, looking at combat and traversal, and which I thought were relatively really good in the first game. What are things we can add to that, just up that more? And then the fourth thing was like really like taking those spectacle pieces and really upping, like making them bigger. It's one reason why we started with Sandman in the beginning, and then all the different ways we could leverage the console. So kind of that was kind of the journey that we went on with this game.
Yeah.
When it came to the narrative as well, I think let's just kind of jump right into it, because now we can.
Let's do it.
When did the idea for Venom, Harry being Venom, kind of come about, and how important was it for you as a team to implement that in a way that feels like you're going on a journey with the characters and it feels like an authentic turn?
Really, really, I would say probably halfway through Spider-Man 1. Like, because we had that teaser scene that shows Norman in the tank and Harry with the symbiote, right? So we knew that, yes, we're kind of painting ourselves in the corner, like, you better do. We could have like said, oh, that's another thing, but we knew that's where we wanted to go, right? And I think that, there was a reason why the symbiote suit wasn't in that first game. I think I even said at one point after the game shipped, I'm like, oh, that kind of story, that thing needs its own game, and that's what we did. Yeah. But we did, and I think our kind of guiding light through this whole 9 years of working on Spider-Man has been like, let's respect the DNA of the franchise. Yeah. But let's not be afraid to mix things up. So, for example, I think Venom's a good example of that. Like, you look at Venom, if you're a fan of Venom, I hope when you see Venom, you're like, oh, I recognize that character. He has the traits, the personality, the characteristics of a great Venom. But the host is different. It's Harry, because we wanted to have a character who had more of an emotional attachment to our heroes, right? So that's one of our change-ups, right? And then we did little things like, in the comics, Venom has multiple weaknesses, like his fire is and high frequency. We said, hey, can we just limit it to sound, because it'll just be. I don't want to sit there and go, okay, everybody, boys and girls, here's the lessons on symbiotes, and here's the 5 different ways it's weak. Let's just pick one and make it something unique and interesting. The number one thing that we talked about Venom was we want to make it our own story.
Yeah.
And this is going to sound, I hope it doesn't come across cheesy, like, how can we make this an emotional Venom story? Yeah. And that was kind of the thing, like, I'm really proud of is that, even though Harry's motivation once he has a symbiote is, what he wants to do, healing the world, is right. The way he's going about it through the symbiote is wrong. So I think we always want to, that's kind of important to us, is like, there's something with whether it's, Otto, whether it's Tinker, and now whether it's Venom, there's something you can connect to with the villain.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you talked about expectations. Like, it must become more tricky to kind of, obviously you're playing with the same pieces that a lot of other stories have. In the first one, you had the Otto story, which is something that has been done before, but you kind of subvert it in really interesting ways. And the expectation from a narrative point is, like, the more games you make, the harder that gets, right? Like, so, and the way you did it with Venom was, I think, done really well, because until then, like, Venom is Eddie Brock, and he's kind of like down on his luck, that kind of thing. But the fact that you went with Harry was very, very unexpected. And it also, unless I'm like reading it wrong, like, it let you work in stuff like Agent Venom, like that costume and that kind of stuff.
I mean, that Harry moment is very much inspired by Agent Venom. For sure.
So like that remixing, how hard is it to get that? I know people always ask, like, how hard is it to work with Marvel to do that stuff? How hard is it for you to kind of draw those connection points? Like, most people wouldn't think of, oh, Agent Venom, perfect, Harry.
That's it's funny. I'm trying to remember. I'm like, okay, when did we think of Agent Venom? I think what we started was what is the path of getting to Venom, right? Like like we kind of started, what's the end, right? Okay, we want Harry to be Venom. All right, now at what point, and like it's going to sound really complicated, but it's not. It's like, okay, I look at the lore and I'm like, okay, what are the elements that people, if we don't do it, they're gonna be really mad. Like, you at some point need, no matter what we do, we need some point where Pete gets the symbiote. And we need at some point where he doesn't have the symbiote anymore, right? Okay, so like we need those things to happen. Well, all right, but we know we've seen Harry in the tank with the symbiote. Now, how does it go from Harry in the tank to having the symbiote, but he's not Venom yet because he hasn't been bonded with Peter yet? And then how can it get to Peter? And then, so he starts, like, it's like a puzzle. Like, and what you have is you have all these pieces, but then what you realize is, like, the puzzle pieces actually don't fit. So you start cutting the pieces of the puzzle to fit the thing. And I think it kind of starts with that. And then you just geek out, man. You just figure, I read this comic book and I saw this thing, Agent Venom. What if all of a sudden we said Harry wants to not only be his partner in business, but also wants to be a superhero, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's the question. Like, the follow up to it is, like, how much of this is like fortuitous? Because the idea of, reach the end and you realize, oh, part of this is Harry feels really powerless. And you don't really realize up until the very last moments that it's not just because he wants to feel healthy again. He wants to feel like he's got some ability to affect the world, and it's being perverted. Like, was that always the plan, or was it like, oh, that element allows us to connect to this element?
I wish I could tell you that I'm so smart that I planned it all out and we were so brilliant. It's one of those things that just comes through iteration.
Okay,
like,
cool.
As we start working on the story, basically we sit in a room and we just take a bunch of note cards and we're just plotting out, like, okay, this is going to happen first, and then this and this, and then we like, okay, this is the story we want. Now, what missions? What would you actually do? Like, because it's, you got to play the game. Just not watching a movie, right? The development process kind of shows you where to go. Right. If that makes any sense. Like, for example, even though we wanted to make a story about Pete and Miles, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say it was totally from day one going to be about them 100% it was going to be like, oh, they both have something happen in their past. The death of Aunt May. Martin Lee responsible for his father's death. They're going to go on a journey on, let's just say January 1 of 2019. They're going to go on a journey where they have to learn to move beyond the past to move forward. That kind of came as we started putting things together, and we were like, because like, and we were just going, okay, what's a relatable thing? Okay, and then we were like, okay, so what if Peter's in the dealing with Aunt May, like what is Miles' obstacle? Like, and that was really important. Like, yes, they have this story of like Kraven coming to town and then eventually symbiote, but we want to have these own individual stories. And we're like, listen, we haven't really been with Pete since Aunt May passed away. So like, I mean, we all know we've lost significant others in our lives. Like it impacts you in sometimes in obvious ways, not so obvious ways. You can see it obviously impacting Peter. And then obviously, and then it impacts him going, I lost Aunt May. I ain't losing Harry. No way, right? So that, and then you look at Miles and you're like, okay, what's a relatable story for a 17, 18-year-old? And we're like, well, I remember how stressful it was to apply to college. And then writing that college essay going like, or university, I'm like, what the hell am I going to write? And him kind of distracting himself and seeing his friends and like making confident next steps. And we're like, and then you start to play around with those pieces and we're like, wow, like, well, we could bring Martin Lee back. And Martin Lee kind of, you got to start doing like, and that's the really fun part. Like it is thinking about those days is like kind of, you're like, oh my God, like we had, like what were we going to do? But that's where like, that's the fun part of the job, right? Is to kind of put it all together and you see like, I mean, it's really like putting a puzzle when you find like, oh, I found it, and poof, it goes in, right? Yeah. And then, but then there's like but then there's the thing where you have the story treatment and it reads great on paper and you start writing scripts and you're like, well, that stinks. That's not going to work. That, or like we start putting that mission together, that's not going to work. And then you're tinkering again, you're moving things around. So I've learned, and I feel like I'm crystallizing this thought as you ask that question. It's like, the game kind of tells you where to go. Like you have an idea of where you want to go, but let the experience happen naturally. And I think sometimes when you're like, it has to be this, no matter what. Now there are some things I can tell you. Like I was like, we're starting with Sandman, no matter what. Like we're going to make it work, and maybe that's not a good thing. But I was like, we're going to start with Sandman. But other things you kind of like ride the wave. You go, okay, I see us heading in this direction. Let's go that. Like I knew we were going to start with Sandman. I knew at some point you're going to play as Venom. Like I didn't want the internet to talk about not playing as Venom, right? So like you put some, stakes in the ground, but these other things you got to learn to bend because these games are too big, too complicated, and like once you make something interactive, it just becomes that much more difficult. So you got to be willing to bend a little bit, and also like I work with really smart people. Yeah. I want them to tell me what we should do, not me tell them what to do. Like I can tell you, we can go through every mission, every story point in the game, and I can point to 3 to 20 people who took that and made it 10 times better. Right. So I just like, I don't want to, it's not, our games are made collaboratively, and we are always kind of, it's always what is the best idea that we have, and what's one we're going to go with. It doesn't come, it's not I sit in a room and go, all right, I got all the answers. Yeah. I don't even want that responsibility. It's not, because I think everything what people bring to the table is just so much more interesting.
I want to talk to you a little bit about one of my favorite missions in the game is with the Coney Island going around the fair, because it definitely feels like in a game full of such huge bombastic moments, it was this really nice, just very human interaction between the 3 friends, and I really love the way that obviously it culminates in a very bombastic sequence.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
But the way that those interactions were just felt so genuine. Yeah. And so where did, the idea for that come from? How do you kind of craft a scene like that one?
So I can tell you it started with the idea of like, hey, so we did the Halloween party in the first game. How can we drive everybody crazy with something even crazier in the second game, in Spider-Man 2? And we're like, well, we're going to build Brooklyn and Queens. There's Coney Island. We could just do that. So there was that. And I think we're like, oh, it would be really cool to go around to Coney Island and play all the mini games and have this thing. But the real answer is, we talked about Spider-Verse, the Spider-Verse films, and they have their own identity, the way they do things, right? You look at the MCU and Spider-Man, they handle it a certain way. They each have their own identity, and I feel like when you look at our Spider-Man franchises, something I'm really proud of, I'm not saying they didn't do this stuff, but I'm saying like for us, a big focus has been like a 360-degree view of the world. And I think that, it's why yes, we have Pete and Miles in their suit and they're doing cool things, but it's just important to see their lives outside the suit. It's also why MJ's playable. Pete and Miles aren't the only people in the world, in this world, right? We have characters who are important to the story, to the world, and they don't have superpowers. What do they like? But I always say, we want to deliver the fantasy of superheroes, but we want to deliver a very human story with believable characters just as much, because you don't care about the stuff in the suit if you don't care about the stuff outside the suit. So we're going to do moments like Coney Island, where it's just three friends catching up and enjoying a good time in Coney Island, somewhere they grew up and probably enjoyed as kids. I think we can all find, I think, to me, was going to the arcade. I love going to the arcade with my friends. Or when I got a little bit older, drink a little bit more, we could go bowling together. I think about those moments. You go down that trip of memory lane, and that was kind of the reason to get that human side of the story in there and to do it on an interactive level. For me, I love Coney Island, but I would say the Queen's Mission, where they went back to Midtown High, is very similar. Yeah. Riding the bikes together and then doing the flashbacks in between and running through the hallways and stuff. So I think it's just, I don't want to make these games if we don't do those missions. Yeah. I'll never not do those. Yeah. In a way, especially, even in the most bombastic things, we should be able to still have I was just watching Endgame the other day because it was the anniversary of Tony Stark dying. I don't want to say Tony Stark dying.
Tony Hawk is very much alive and well.
Yeah, yes, he is. Thank God. And I was thinking about Endgame, right? It's this bombastic, crazy setting. Some guy, purple, snapped his finger, 50% of things go away, right? But if you look at all of the motivations and the stories and the arcs of all of those Avengers, completely relatable. Yeah. Tony doesn't want to lose what he's gained. Thor feels responsible for what he did. Natasha is just lonely. Yeah. Those are, yes, it's crazy circumstances, but their story is so normal, right? It's just in a weird world. So I think that's something I always want us to do in our games, in our Spider-Man games. And I think that it's something from day one we want to do. We've always just wanted to do it more and more and more as those games go on.
One of the things that I like about these games and your team's approach to it is that you apply that same kind of humanizing and relatability to the villains as well. And it feels like redemption is a big part of this story.
It is.
I guess the question is what came first, Martin Lee or Anti-Venom? Did you know you wanted Anti-Venom in this game and Martin Lee came because of that, and you knew you could also kind of redeem him to a degree? Because that was fascinating. And then the other part of it is in a very bold move, you seemingly killed off a bunch of villains, and there's almost a sympathetic quality. When I heard that, Scorpion was dead, that, and Vulture. I seen Tombstone. Yeah. That was quite weirdly emotional for me, because it's you have a history, and there's almost as Spider-Man fans, you just expect them to be there to do that dance. But then you have this agent of chaos in Kraven who appears and just starts wiping the board off. What was the kind of thinking behind that?
So I do we probably work on the villains as much as we do the heroes, because I think we've grown away from this. Everything's a mustache twirly. I want to blow up the world. I want revenge. Right? That I think everybody has kind of moved beyond that. Right? We always say we want the villains to be the heroes of their own story. I know I stole that from somebody. I'm not that smart. I know someone said that. That's really a lot smarter than me. But I remember it. It's something that's kind of ingrained in my head. And we've always said Martin Lee in many ways is, he was basically experimented on, right? And he, and now he was a little bit obviously more on the revenge side, right? But he's a man who's really hurt. I mean, Norman, a lot of it was responsible for. But in terms of your question about Anti-Venom and Martin Lee, I can tell you I'm not sure what came first in terms of the chicken or the egg in there, but I can tell you that we knew the symbiote powers were going to be really popular. We knew once we put Pete in the black suit and the symbiote suit, and they're going to go, this is awesome. Because it's a power fantasy, right? We also knew once we're going to take him away, people are going to be pissed. And we're okay, we got Venom. Miles is got all these cool powers. Now we got Pete with the arms, but people are going to miss those symbiote powers. And we're okay, what can we do? And I'm like, well, we do have anti-venom. We could have anti-venom.
Let me consult the law.
Oh, we can do that. And I was like, well, and then I think someone said like, well, we could also, in the lore, anti-venom is Mr. Negative and the symbiote come together, right? And we're like, well, if we do that, then Martin Lee's back in the game, and then we can have Miles have a story with him that ties to him. It's the puzzle piece thing again, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was, I don't know if it's happy circumstance or knowing the lore and those kind of things and like having a lot of puzzle pieces to play with. But I do think one of my favorite moments in the game is that moment between Miles and Martin Lee.
Just
so
about
good.
to bring that up.
Yeah,
I
so-
love that
it's
line
so- really,
so
yeah.
So
much.
about he can't forgive him, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he can't let this bother. And
Yeah.
that's the moment where Miles can finally write the essay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's the moment. Like he needed to do that in order to write the essay, right? And again, that's one of our writing team getting together and going how we're going to map out Miles' story, and now we're going to have Martin Lee and then it coming through, and then obviously then you have two amazing actors who take your script and make it even better.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just like and you talked about the deaths.
Yeah.
I know they do this in comics because there's, they're bringing them back, right? I get it. And not to say that's right or wrong or whatever. I think for us is like, I just think there has to be real consequences to things happening.
Yeah.
And I think that, if we're going to do it, like if we're saying Kraven's this brutal character who's like really like, he's a mysterious, brutal character who has like this weird fascination with like, I want to find the person who's going to be strong enough to defeat me, and I'll be happy with my death, right? He wants a good death, basically. Well, if I was and I said like, well, guess what? Scorpion and Vulture, or whoever, aren't really dead, it kind of weakens his story, right? And like, or like, all of a sudden, like, we have this big emotional thing with Aunt May, and I'm like, oh, guess what? Some random character came back and resurrected her. Like, all that thing was for naught. So it's like, it's having like real stakes, real consequences.
It also plays into the idea that when Pete has the Venom suit, there's the idea of he could just kill them off.
Yeah.
And there's the mention of it where I think Martin Lee actually talks about it, and he's like, I think he's scared of what he could do as Venom. And like you see that, this is what it means is what Kraven is actually doing.
Yeah.
Like, and it in certain respects, Kraven, by killing them off, has actually helped the city in a more meaningful way than Spider-Man has putting them in the raft.
We even talked about, I think at one point we even talked about how like, do we even have Jameson talk about like, well, this is a good thing and stuff like that. There's so many. It's funny. We have so many characters in this game. It's like sometimes juggle all these storylines is insane. We have, thank God for our writing team. They follow along better than I do. But yeah, I think that it's just really important. Like I think back to like just my favorite superhero movies. Like I think Killmonger is probably one of the best villains in the MCU because like. Killmonger, you totally understand his motivation, why he wants to do it. He just goes about it the complete wrong way, right? There's a level, I guess, empathy would be the word for these characters in a bit. And I think that's now Kraven's a little bit of an X factor because he's just so like, but
then you learn that he's dying.
Yes.
And you're like, I can't relate to it,
Yeah,
but I can see how it can
understand
drive
why.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I do think that first of all, thank you for the compliment about the villains because it's really hard because you can screw them up really easily, and we work really hard to get it right because, it's just, I mean, you have a guy wearing a lion vest, it's like sometimes as a comic book fan, I love the look of him. I think he looks super cool, but like, we got to make you understand him and be scared of him and believe him, that's the most important thing. So, same thing with Venom, seeing like that giant, thing, you got to understand there's a person in there.
Yeah, for me, I think like what I really appreciate as a longtime fan of Spider-Man is Insomniac Games specifically, I think have been the best iteration of those characters in a long time because for better or for worse, Marvel is kind of turned a lot of the characters into kind of jokes right now with like, you've got Venom through the Venom movies, like they have their value, but it's played for laughs in a lot of ways, and same with like Morbius and like Kraven's now got his own movie coming out, I believe. But these are like this was like a reminder of why Craven is fearsome, and I haven't had that in a long time, since like the original animated series, where I was like, oh, this dude's scary.
Yeah, I think for us at the end of the day, it's just focusing on, we've said I think it for us is like we always talk about tone, and I think that for us, it's just what we try to do is have a consistent tone for the world and the characters in the game. So I think it's not about one way is right, one way is the wrong. It's just we felt like this is what we want to do. We want to have, I would say, larger than life characters that you believe.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the way we look at it. Like I don't want to, like I never want us to be embarrassed of the lore and the costumes and stuff. Like no, we're going to embrace it, and we're going to do it in a way that makes you like love it.
Yeah, I think a good example of embracing that is, and I'm interested in how, whether it was whether you found yourself being like, is this too far? The inclusion of Scream as a character, because obviously Scream is like one of a few symbiote characters, and it's not, as far as I remember, in any instance been Mary Jane before.
It's never been.
So like that's where it starts to be like you're delving into symbiote mythology.
Yeah, so I can tell you that we were always going to have her turn into a symbiote. And actually the first concept we did is actually of her, but she's more like black and white. It kind of looks more like a Venom kind of thing. And then, this is where you kind of go, all right, we're going to put the Marvel hat on for a second. And we're like, well, she has red hair already. We don't have any plans for Scream. Why can't Harry turn her into Scream? Like, and it's like, if you know, you know. Like, if you're a Marvel fan, you're like, that's cool, that's Scream. And she has all the abilities to Scream. And if you don't, you're like, oh, Harry, just like he turned other people into symbiotes, he turned MJ into this type of symbiote.
Yeah.
So it's more like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go on.
I was going to say, speaking of MJ, and you said like so many more characters. I really loved the impact felt on them way more.
Yeah.
Like I think particularly the Scream fight when MJ, obviously under the influence of the symbiote, but like the stuff she says, like God, couples therapy.
Holy
oh
crap!
my
She
God.
rips him.
Him a new
She's basically like, here's everything that you're terrible at.
And it's really effective because like I was distracted while playing it, listening to her being like, wow, this is awful, and like I'm getting my ass kicked at the same time.
Yeah.
But also like not just the fact that she's dealing with essentially being like left behind by Peter a lot. Like she is absolutely second to Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But like everything with her job.
Yeah.
Like as soon as she's like, oh, I've got to hit these metrics, I've got to get on the front page. You're like, oh, this girl is going through it, and she is going to snap.
She's compromising herself.
But that's the thing. Like we talk about, like that's something somebody might actually have to go through, and like maybe are they going to make decisions for the right reasons, for the wrong reasons? She realized she eventually realized that she's going down a path that she doesn't believe in, and it's like completely does something else. I think that MJ is a really important character to me because I do think she provides a perspective on a viewpoint of the world that we need to see from like Pete and Miles obviously have this really, we've seen their perspective a lot in terms of like we see how they see the world. What is it like on the other side of that relationship? What is it like? And I think the other thing is when we talk about the symbiote, in many ways we talk about addiction a lot, right?
Yeah.
And there's at certain points like you see Peter kind of loses himself to it, and he changes, his personality changes, and he says things like, I mean, could you ever imagine Peter saying to, you're not the hero I am. Like he says that like, he would never say to Harry, why don't you go pop some more pills, and or yelling at her for her headline and stuff like that. And I think, you talk about some of the exchanges. Some of my favorite stuff is the fight between Miles and Peter. Yeah. And to me, that's like, it's happening during the combat, but it's actually really emotional. And like, you can hear Peter like trying to justify himself. And Miles is like, you gotta. And I think the thing is with both that fight with Peter and then with the one with Scream is like, we talked about not only the impact on the person who's under the symbiote, how does that impact the people around them? And I think that we realize is like your friend, what we talked about is your friends and family and everybody around you can only get you a certain way, but at the end of the day, it's you that has to take the final step. That's why Peter's the one at the end that rips it. It's why MJ kind of goes, I'm going over here for the sound to kind of rip it off. It's like that final step needs to be taken by you. And it's kind of the same thing happens with Harry. He's the one who goes, Pete, do it.
Yeah.
So I think it's. I'm not trying to say, oh, like we're telling all the levels of addiction and all that stuff, but we did. It's just kind of again like taking this big crazy thing about an alien substance and trying to add some believability about what these characters are going through.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting kind of takes that you guys have put into this game, and it feels like a pot bubbling and just about to flow over the entire time, is Norman Osborn. Yeah. Where like, if you know the universe, you just
that's
you're waiting
you know
for it
yeah.
to happen. You're waiting for the bomb to like explode, and I really loved the way that you guys played with it. Where he's more doting as a father than he ever has been before, even though you can tell it's kind of like not all genuine, and then. Yeah. The way you play with colors, with green, and like the way it builds up, and then if you know like the Goblin story, the way he starts to be more like fatherly towards Peter, you're like, oh no, we know where this is going.
Yeah, there's one of my favorite scenes is when Pete screams at Harry and MJ, and then he sees Norman yelling, and they have that like very father-son moment, and that's what Harry overhears a little bit, and he's like, oh, so I'm basically being replaced. Yeah. First of all, Mark Rolston is our actor who plays Norman Osborn, and like that's just like, yeah, Mark, you just do what you want to do, and we're going to record it, right? When we think of Norman and where we're going, I think I'm glad you said sympathetic, because I think there's a or I don't know if I said it, maybe you said, I don't know, but we wanted to get away from like the very like the expected storyline with Norman. Like I think if we can the way we're going, what could happen to him maybe it might be more understandable.
Yeah, I think the setup is definitely there, because like it's easy to forget because you play the game for 30 hours, but like he's the one that put the symbiote into play. So like, and then at the end where he's like, what have you done to my boy, to them, he's really trying to deflect from the fact that he 100%. Started all of this. Yeah. And then the ending, obviously, where he's trying to get the names of who they are out of Doc Ock, you can tell like, oh, he's fixating his like kind of obsession on them being the problem, and it's a really fantastic setup that I hope like you guys explore further.
Well, I will tell you that scene I've had in my head between Otto and Norman since the beginning. Yeah. I said I don't do a lot of things right, but I said if we can get this, if we can go down the path I go, I want that last scene to be between Otto and Norman having that conversation. Yeah. So if we ever, continue doing these things, we can, fan favorite.
If we ever.
To see, because they're so adversarial in that first game.
Yeah.
That relationship changes, and I think it could be fun to explore.
Yeah, I like how menacing it is when Otto is like, when he tells them like he tells him like they hurt my son. He's like, good. Yeah. And you're like, oh, this is about to be a really awful
Spicy.
Like partnership.
Yeah.
One of the others.
Oh, you got me excited.
Yeah. One of the other smaller stories that I really, really like appreciated was Tombstone. Like that idea of rehabilitation. Yeah. And I was waiting for the moment where he's like, actually, I'm evil. And it just never happens. And I was like, I really respect that they showed that in this world, people can turn.
Yeah.
And the same with Mysterio as well, to a degree. Like, it's really, really.
It's funny. You're not the first person to mention that. And I don't know if that was, I wish I could say complete plan. I'll say the writers planned it and they did a great job executing it. But I mean, that's reality, right? I mean, people can change. I mean, I know people, friends I have who are close friends where I'm like, in the beginning, I'm like, I don't like you. I don't like you. And then I hope some people, feel that the way about me, that like, hey, like, you're not the person I thought you were, in a good way. So I do think that's important to show. Like, again, it's more of that, show the world, yes, it's a world that has superheroes and supervillains, but it doesn't mean like it's not reality. There's not a reality to it. It's not a believability to it. So I think that's really important that we continue to explore across it. It's not just that. It's, showing Miles connect to his community in Harlem. It's, showing him interacting with students in his it's Brooklyn Visions and helping them out. It's Peter sitting on a bench with an older gentleman listening to stories about his wife. It's showing all of those. It doesn't ever. I like to say, I've been talking a little bit about like Pete and Miles' job isn't just to deal with Sandman. It doesn't.
No.
It's deal with it's to help out with everything. That's what a true hero is. You don't have to, and you also don't need to be a superpowered person to be a hero.
No.
And I hope MJ and Haley show that.
Yeah, definitely. One of my favorite missions is actually an example of how, they can solve problems in a way that you don't expect. And it's a random side mission. It's the monster one where it's like that a blind lady who's like, something is digging up my backyard.
That's a great one.
It's such a nice one. By the end of it, you
the
realize,
Fido mission.
You realize that it's one of those robot wolves, and you like reprogram it to be a nice dog. And she's like, I'm allergic to dogs, and he's like, here's a metal dog that'll take it.
Right?
It's just so
and then
sweet.
Genki's like hacks into it and like does it all. It's so funny.
Like I've uploaded thousands of guide dog videos into it. It's such a clever way to do it.
Yeah, that's like, I can tell you right now, we didn't have we said, hey, we want some, we call them friendly neighborhood Spider-Man quests.
Yeah.
And the team just goes and creates stuff like for example, the Howard mission, the one where you're helping Howard. That was created by one of our designers, Brian Matheson, who did it during a game jam. Actually we had like, we have like this kind of, sometimes we have like this week or two between Thanksgiving and the holiday break. When someone's like, you know what, let's not schedule anything. Let's just let people have fun and create stuff. And he designed this thing, and we're like, oh, that's going in the game. So I think that's a good example of just Insomniac being Insomniac, and I think that's one of the reasons why, it's like if I said, oh, it's going to be this and this and this, we would never get those kind of moments. We'd never get those kind of creative missions. So it's just it's funny when we sent out the review code. I wrote a little letter. Who knows if anybody read it? But I was like, I so want to go. Just please play side content. And I think I added like a comment of like, this is some of my favorite stuff, because I was like, I really want people just to understand, like, we put a lot of time and effort to improve the storytelling and the creativity that went into that stuff, because we knew like that was something we definitely wanted to level up this time. And I'm glad from talking to a lot of people, it's definitely resonating with people. So it's good to hear. The team did a great job.
A couple of loose ends to tie up. First one, returning to the idea of expectation and kind of like the scale of it. So you've now got, you moved into 2 Spider-Men, which was a big task.
Yep.
And by the end of this game, the thing I'm like, oh my God, I do not envy them, is the amount of things that are now on the table.
Yeah.
Because obviously there is the Doc Ock stuff where he's like, I'm writing the final chapter. There's Norman Osborn. There's the stuff with,
Silk.
Silk. We'll come to that later. But like if you collect all the spider bots, there's like, if Miguel comes around, do this. But then there's also Cletus Cassidy and Carnage. Like,
you're making me sweat. You're making me sweat.
It is hot in here.
Yeah. What does that kind of mean for like the next entry? Obviously, you can't talk in length, but
also like the reference from Wong. Like,
exactly.
Like,
there's a lot of that stuff, and at some point, I guess the question is this something that you expect to come to a head in a meaningful way? Or is this like, right now, we just want to make something that's memorable and interesting, so we will do this Carnage story, not necessarily with payoff in mind? Or is it a case of, no, we're building to something, like this is going to be a big thing that it all comes together in?
Can I answer yes and no at the same time?
Yeah,
like,
sure.
It's kind of like, listen, we have a lot of pieces to play with if we want to, right? And I think that's exciting. It can be daunting.
Yeah.
But, I said this to somebody, and by the way, internet, please don't quote me if I could have sworn I remember, like, I'm a MCU junkie. Like, I read everything. Like, I'm reading the new book about them, and like, I'm just obsessed. I'm obsessed with that. How like to me, like, movies like Infinity War and Endgame should never worked, and I'm like, how did they even make it work? I just don't believe it, right? And I remember hearing something like Marvel, they're not like, oh, we're going to hold this back because like, oh, it might be to something later. It's like, we're going to put everything in to make the best game possible, the best movie possible now. We'll deal with it later. I'll deal with it later. Like, it's about doing the best thing. Now, am I going to sit here and say like, I don't think about the future if we have those possibilities? Well, sure. And I think I don't think we've painted ourselves into a corner. Will it be challenging for some? Sure. Guess what? Game development is challenging in other ways. So, but I would rather have that challenge. I'd rather have that challenge than you tell me, I don't like Spider-Man 2. I don't want to see any more of these characters. These characters stink. We're done. So I'll take that. I'll take that over the other. But listen, I'm 46 years old and I get to play with Marvel characters. Like I got a pretty good life. We'll figure it out some way or another if we get the ability to.
Yeah, and I guess the final thing, returning to what Lucy mentioned earlier, was Silk. Was that always in the plan?
No.
Was it
Can I just say how much I loved that storyline about
the dual dating
about the
thing?
date?
Yeah,
Oh
so
my god!
cute.
I rolled credits and I was like, oh wait, we never got to see the date.
That's
Yeah.
a great.
I forgot that the Rios had a date planned, and then when Miles asked about
Miles
the date,
says?
I was like, oh.
So I wish I could tell you, like, 9 years ago, I knew Cindy and Albert Moon are going to be at that door. I didn't.
Yeah.
I think we talk about expectations, and I think we talk about, I think some of the hardest things we do is like, because Marvel fans are so passionate. They're like they're expecting this, they want this, or they has to do this. And you're like, oh my God, they're guessing everything. Like, how do you surprise them? And there's a limit of that, right? But I do think that we have an opportunity, if possible, to explore a character that hasn't been fully explored yet, and I am excited about that.
Nice. Very excited to see it. Yeah.
And I'm sure people are asking, well, did you think of another character that could have been there? The answer is yes. But we wanted to do something maybe unexpected.
Ben Reilly.
Yeah. I get asked about him a lot.
His outfit is just cool, and I think like every time it's weird because his outfit is in the game, but it feels wrong to put Peter in that outfit.
Yeah.
So I never.
But I can tell you right now, if I didn't have that suit in the game, that would be a problem.
It would be upsetting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people
You'd
would be
get less.
very
That'd be a
upset.
problem. It'd be
Yeah.
a problem.
But yeah, I think like for me, like, I think the big takeaway for me is like before the game came out, I think I guessed most of the pieces to be like, oh, Venom, anti-Venom, this is who is.
Oh, you guessed anti-Venom? Nice.
I
Nice.
figured there needs to be like, obviously because of Miles and
Yeah.
Mr. Negative, I thought, oh, like, cool, that's likely.
I didn't get shit.
Yeah.
So
But like every guess that I made, the way you guys got there wasn't exactly how I predicted. It was completely different
Good.
route. So it was like, okay, you took the things that I know and you turned them upside down. So even me, as someone who's been reading and experienced Spider-Man since a kid, didn't see it coming.
Good.
So I think that's a kind of fantastic.
Well, I
approach.
you all know Greg Miller. He's
Oh,
a
yeah,
big
yeah.
Marvel
Who?
fan. Yeah, exactly.
With or
And-
without his shirt.
Both. And I remember when we were doing the first movie, he was like, well, I was like, there's no surprises. And I was like, oh, so you thought we were going to kill Aunt May? And he's like, well, no, I mean, not that one. And I'm like, and I think, something we talk a lot about, just in terms of like PR. Hi, Jen. And how much you show before even the game comes out.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like I didn't want to show anything. Like, I didn't want to show a thing. Like, I was having meetings. Like, I don't want to show anything.
Yeah.
For that very reason. Like, I don't want you to go into the game thinking, but the fact that also I have to be an adult and know we have to actually market the game, but the fact that there are, like I said, there are certain things I feel like we need to do as being Marvel fans, but if we can do it in a way that still surprises you, that's the best of both worlds.
Well, I think you definitely did that.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this.
you.
You guys are great.
Discussion.
I forget we're even recording. So yeah, we want to talk. Yeah, we can, no, but I appreciate it. Thank you. And I'm just happy to. It's just fun to at this point. Like it's been a long time. Just being able to talk and even say that Harry is Venom. Like I've been holding that out forever.
Honestly, the one thing that I did get wrong is I thought Kraven was going to get the symbiote because I only did that because of the physical stature of them. Like I was like, it matches up for Big Venom.
We talked. Just I think briefly, though. I will tell you, we at one point had a Venomized Sandman.
Oh wow!
It's just a
That's
concept.
really
It was just a
interesting.
concept. He was going to be Venomized. And then I realized, Sandman's just going to be hard on its own. But there's a concept image. I'm probably going to get in trouble for even saying it. But it looked really, in concept form, it was really cool. Like, this is really great. Whatever, I'm just describe it. Like, there's this great top-down shot of Miles charging up his evolved Venom. And he's looking down, and you see this giant Sandman who's like a Venom face.
Oh,
pretty
that's
cool.
amazing.
People are I'm probably gonna get so much in trouble. Oh, well. At least the game's good, right? Hey, it's been fun while it lasted. But we talked about Venomizing more people and stuff like that. For sure.
The bit where the stone is shown, my first thought was, oh, are they going to do the King in Black? And then that was like, that seems way too crazy. Like you cannot have Null knocking
Did you
around.
expect the wings?
I did not expect the
Okay,
wings. That
okay.
was very cool.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman, who've written
Yes.
the Venom comic for a long
Yeah.
time, and that was my tip of the hat to them.
Yeah, it was very cool, especially when like he's quickly trying to get back to the
Yeah.
collider.
Yeah.
And he just like pops out and he's
Oh,
gone.
yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
this is deadly. Now
Yeah.
he can fly.
Yeah.
They
That
fly
was-
now.
Yeah, it was cool.
But yeah, Bryan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Congrats on
Thank you very much.
the many years of effort paying off. And
Thank
we
you.
are super excited to see the next phase of Spider-Man. And also the other guy that you're working on.
Oh,
who
yeah,
isn't
the other-
referenced
the other
at
guy,
all
the
for
other-
some
yeah, the
reason.
other guy. Yeah, I can tell you it's going to be very good. It's gonna
We're
be
very
good.
excited to see it. Thank you once again.
Thank you.